The first mistake was thinking she looked suspicious. The second mistake was assuming she would stay silent. Dr. Maya Carter had spent the last 14 hours saving lives in a hospital emergency room, and now, walking home under the golden streaks of the setting sun, she found herself with the cold muzzle of a gun aimed straight at her chest. Two police officers stood rigid, their voices sharp, cutting through the air with the familiar echo of authority that had no room for reason. "Hands where I can see them," one barked. Her stethoscope still dangled from her neck, absurd proof of who she was. Yet in their eyes it was no shield, no identity, just another black woman in the wrong place. Her heart thudded in her ribs, not just with fear, but with fury. How many times had she warned her students, her younger cousins, that skin could become a sentence in America? How many times had she dreamed that her title doctor would one day eclipse the color that defined how others judged her? The street around her hushed. A mother dragged her child away. A man closed his shop door. No one stepped forward. No one spoke up. It was as if the whole world had signed a silent pact. Stay out of it, because it is safer to pretend not to see. Maya raised her trembling hands, though her voice remained steady. "I am a doctor. I just came from County General. I live 3 blocks down." But their eyes narrowed, suspicion flaring, hands tightening on triggers as if her words were invisible, swallowed by the prejudice baked into their training, their culture, their fear. For a second, she saw her own death in the twitch of a finger. Her mind flashed with memories: the first baby she delivered, the soldier she treated in Afghanistan who told her she was the only reason he saw his family again, the promise she made to her mother that she would always rise higher than the hate around her. Then the sound of heavy boots struck the pavement like thunder. From the edge of the block, figures emerged, soldiers in Pentagon insignia, faces set like steel, eyes burning with purpose. They moved fast, cutting through the crowd, their presence commanding a silence deeper than the one before. And then she saw him, Colonel James Archer, her mentor from the military research program, the man who once told her, "When the system breaks you down, we stand you back up." He stepped between her and the guns, his body like a wall. "Lower your weapons," his voice boomed, calm yet unyielding. "That woman is with me." The police froze, caught between arrogance and fear, the fragile veil of their authority cracking under the weight of a power greater than their prejudice. The crowd began to stir, whispers rising, cameras lifting, the story shifting before their eyes. But Maya, still trembling, understood that this was more than just a confrontation. This was a mirror, a reflection of a country still tearing at its seams. And this was only the beginning. The air was molten with silence. The policemen did not lower their guns, though their eyes darted between the colonel's insignia and Maya's dark, steady face. It was as if their training had collided with their prejudice, and both fought for dominance in their trembling hands. "Step back, sir. This is a police matter," one of them said, his voice cracking on the words "sir." Colonel Archer did not blink. His stance was a line drawn in the sand. The soldiers behind him fanned out like a shield, their boots anchoring the ground, as if to remind everyone that power could wear different uniforms. "No," Archer said, each syllable deliberate. "This is a matter of justice. You're pointing loaded weapons at a decorated physician, one who has served this nation more honorably than either of you ever could by acting this way." His words sliced through the humid dusk, striking nerves. The officers bristled, pride warring with exposure. The crowd grew restless, whispers swelling into a tide. Phones lifted higher, red recording lights blinking like tiny beacons of accountability. Maya's throat tightened. She wanted to scream, to let loose the fury that burned in her chest, but she also knew the fragility of this moment. One sudden word, one twitch of a wrist, could turn the air into gunfire. She spoke instead, her voice trembling but firm. "I told you who I am. You refused to see me. Maybe now you will." Her words carried further than she expected. A woman in the crowd shouted, "She's a doctor. I've seen her at County General." A man added, "She saved my nephew last month." Slowly, the dam of silence broke, voices pouring into the street like floodwater. But the officers seemed deaf, their gaze narrowing further, suspicion sinking deeper, as if the louder the truth became, the more dangerous it felt to them. Archer sensed it too. He shifted closer, his voice now edged with iron. "This stops now. Holster your weapons." or I'll make this a federal issue. That was the crack. The word federal hit the officers like a slap, their arrogance suddenly paling against the weight of Pentagon authority, military discipline, and the glaring cameras of dozens of witnesses. The taller officer hissed under his breath, jaw clenched, and finally, reluctantly, lowered his gun. The other followed, though his eyes still burned with resentment. The guns clicked back into their holsters, but the damage was already done. Maya exhaled shakily, her knees weak. Her body felt both weightless and unbearably heavy, the rush of adrenaline threatening to split her apart. Archer reached for her, steadying her with one hand on her shoulder. "You okay?" She wanted to laugh. The question felt absurd against the backdrop of what had just happened. But she met his gaze, and in that moment she allowed herself to lean, just slightly, on the presence of someone who refused to let her stand alone. "I'm alive," she whispered. "That's something." But she knew deep down that being alive wasn't enough. Not when her life had been placed at the mercy of men who had decided, in the space of seconds, that her skin was a threat. The crowd did not disperse. People lingered, hungry for resolution, for answers, for justice. Phones stayed raised, lenses capturing every twitch, every word, the digital memory of injustice and resistance weaving itself into the fabric of truth. Archer turned to the officers, his jaw sharp as stone. "You will file a report. You will include the presence of witnesses, the fact that this woman identified herself, and the baseless nature of your stop." The taller officer muttered. She looked suspicious. The words rang out like an insult, cheap and venomous. Maya's chest clenched. She looked him straight in the eye and said, "Suspicious of what?" Breathing while black. A murmur rippled through the crowd, some people clapping, others calling out words of support. The officer flinched, but said nothing more. Archer's team began guiding Maya away, their bodies forming a moving wall around her. The golden light of the sun seemed to follow, painting her silhouette in warmth even as her heart simmered with the cold ache of humiliation. She did not cry. She refused to. But the weight of what had just unfolded pressed on her ribs like a vice. Every step forward felt like an act of defiance. Every breath, a small victory stolen from the jaws of fear. As they reached a safer block, Archer slowed, giving her space to walk beside him. "You don't have to speak now," he said quietly. "But when you're ready, people need to hear this. They need to see it, through your eyes." Maya shook her head, her throat raw. "Do you know what it costs to keep telling the same story? To keep bleeding in public, so people will finally admit it's real? I'm tired, James. I save lives every day, and it's still not enough to make them see me as human." His silence was heavy, respectful. Then, after a pause, he said, "That's exactly why they need your voice. Because they'll try to erase this. They'll paint you as the problem. But the truth, your truth has power." She glanced at him, at the conviction in his eyes. He had always believed in her, ever since she joined the military's medical research division years ago. He had pushed her, challenged her, stood by her. And now, once again, he was asking her to rise when all she wanted was to collapse. The rest of the night passed in a blur. Statements were taken, witnesses interviewed, though Maya noticed how the officers who had nearly shot her were shielded by their peers, protected by protocols that bent under the weight of loyalty but not justice. Archer's presence ensured no one dared to silence her entirely, but the system was already working, already twisting. She could feel it, and she knew this battle was only the surface. The real war was deeper, quieter, fought in courtrooms and newsrooms and the private corners of American minds. When she finally returned home, exhaustion crashed over her. She dropped onto her couch, burying her face in her hands. But sleep would not come. The memory replayed endlessly, the gleam of the guns, the icy command of their voices, the way strangers had looked at her like she was already halfway gone. Somewhere in that loop of fear and fury, resolve began to burn. Not the brittle kind that snaps under pressure, but the slow, smoldering fire that builds until it can no longer be contained. By morning, her decision was clear. She would not let this moment be buried. She would not let it vanish into statistics and silence. She was not just a victim. She was a doctor, a soldier, a black woman who refused to be erased. And she was going to fight back, not with guns or fists, but with truth, with courage, with the undeniable power of a story that could no longer be ignored. The morning sun crept through the blinds like a relentless spotlight, refusing to let Maya hide. She had barely slept. Her mind pulsed with fragments of memory. The glint of metal, the command to freeze, the sudden wall of uniforms from the Pentagon stepping in. The images replayed in a cruel loop, each time her heart jolting as though the trigger had finally been pulled. She sat at her kitchen table, hands wrapped around a mug of coffee that had long gone cold. Her phone buzzed nonstop. Messages, missed calls, notifications piling in like waves against a crumbling shore. She ignored most of them until Archer's name appeared on the screen. She answered. "They're already spinning it," he said without preamble. "Local stations are calling it a routine stop. The department statement claims you match the description of a burglary suspect." Maya let out a bitter laugh that tasted of ash. "Routine? I was coming home from saving lives. The only thing I matched was their fear." Archer's voice was steady, but beneath it was the hum of urgency. "This is the moment, Maya. If you don't speak, their version becomes the truth. But if you do..." He trailed off, leaving the weight of the choice in her silence. She closed her eyes, inhaling deeply. She had never sought the spotlight. Her work had always been her answer to the world's cruelty, a scalpel against its wounds, a stethoscope against its lies. But maybe now, her voice had to be the instrument. "I'll speak," she said finally, "but on my terms. No sensationalism, just the truth." By noon, her face was everywhere. Clips of her in her white coat, photos pulled from hospital websites, headlines screaming about the incident. Some praised her bravery. Others questioned her actions, her motives, her very identity. Comment sections seethed with venom. Why was she walking there? Why didn't she comply faster? Another race card being played. The noise was deafening, but Maya refused to shrink. That evening, she stood before a room full of cameras at a press conference organized by Archer and his contacts. The podium felt like a battlefield. She adjusted the microphone with hands that trembled not from fear, but from the gravity of truth. "My name is Dr. Maya Carter," she began, her voice carrying across the room. "I am a physician. I've dedicated my life to saving others. Yet last night, walking home from my hospital shift, I found myself staring down the barrel of a gun, not because of anything I did, but because of who I am." The room hushed. Even the cameras seemed to lean closer. The officers did not see a doctor. They did not see a neighbor. They saw a threat because they saw my skin. And if my colleagues from the Pentagon had not arrived, I might not be standing here today. That is the reality we live with. That is the reality we cannot ignore. Her words hung in the air like a verdict. Reporters scribbled, shutters clicked, but Maya's eyes stayed locked forward, unflinching. She was not speaking for headlines. She was speaking for survival, for every name etched into protest signs, for every mother who had buried a child beneath the weight of prejudice. The aftermath was a storm. Support poured in, letters, emails, patients arriving at the hospital just to thank her, strangers stopping her on the street with words of solidarity. But the backlash was just as fierce. Hate mail flooded her inbox. Anonymous voices snarled threats. Someone spray-painted "liar" across her apartment door one night, the red letters dripping like blood. Maya scrubbed it off with shaking hands, but the stain clung to her spirit. Archer increased security around her, Pentagon allies checking in, ensuring she wasn't left alone. Yet even their presence could not shield her from the gnawing question. How many more times could she survive being seen as less than human? One evening, as she sat in the hospital lounge between shifts, her colleague Dr. Patel approached quietly. "I watched your speech," he said, his eyes soft. "You made us proud, but you need to take care of yourself too. Carrying the weight of a whole fight, it can break even the strongest." Maya forced a smile. "I don't feel strong. I feel like I'm constantly patching wounds no one else wants to admit are real." Patel nodded, his voice almost a whisper. "That's what makes you dangerous to them. You won't let them look away." His words settled into her chest like a fragile piece of armor. Dangerous. Not because she carried a weapon, but because she carried truth. The weeks that followed were a blur of interviews, hearings, and sleepless nights. The police department launched an internal investigation, though Maya quickly realized what that meant. A slow grinding machine designed to wear her down until outrage cooled and silence returned. But this time, the outrage did not cool. Veterans she had treated came forward, vouching for her service. Patients told their stories. Activists organized rallies in her name, chanting not just for her, but for every unspoken victim whose face never reached a podium. The city was alive with tension, crackling like a live wire. And through it all, Maya stood in the center, unwilling but unyielding. Still, the threats grew darker. One night, she received an envelope with no return address. Inside was a single photo, her, walking home from the hospital, circled in red ink. Beneath it, scrawled words, "Next time, no one will save you." Her breath caught. The walls of her apartment seemed to close in. She called Archer immediately, her voice shaking despite her resolve. He arrived within minutes, his presence filling the room with a steadiness she clung to. He studied the photo, his jaw clenched. "They want to break you. But you're not alone in this. Do you hear me, Maya? You are not alone." She nodded, though fear still coiled in her gut. For the first time, she realized this was bigger than her story, bigger than her name. This was a fight against a shadow that stretched across generations, one that would not disappear just because she spoke once. The fire in her chest flared again, hotter now, fueled by the knowledge that silence was no longer an option. She would not be erased. She would not be intimidated. She would stand, and in standing, she would force the world to look at itself, no matter how ugly the reflection. The courthouse was suffocating with heat and hostility. Outside, protesters filled the steps, their chants echoing against the stone like a heartbeat refusing to quiet. Inside, cameras crowded every corner, lenses hungry for spectacle. Maya sat at the plaintiff's table, her posture straight despite the tremor in her hands. Across from her, the two officers sat stiff in their uniforms, their lawyers speaking in polished sentences that twisted reality into something unrecognizable. "It was a tense situation," he said. "My clients acted reasonably given the circumstances." Dr. Carter, while accomplished, matched the description of an armed suspect. Their actions were based on procedure, not prejudice. Maya wanted to laugh, to scream, but instead she lifted her chin. When the judge called her to testify, she walked forward with steps that felt like carrying the weight of every name whispered at vigils, every face painted on protest signs. She raised her right hand, swore to tell the truth, and turned to face the courtroom. Her voice was steady, though her heart thundered. "I was walking home after a 14-hour shift. I wore my hospital ID. My stethoscope hung around my neck. I identified myself. And still, I was treated as if my very existence was a threat. Guns were pointed at me, not because of what I did, but because of who I am. That is not procedure. That is prejudice." Gasps rippled through the gallery. Cameras clicked, capturing every flicker of resolve on her face. She continued, "The danger of that night didn't end when the guns were lowered. It followed me in every headline questioning my integrity, in every threat mailed to my home, in the fear that one day my name might join a list of the dead instead of the living. I am here because silence is no longer survival. I am here because my life, and the lives of countless others, are worth more than the fear projected onto our skin." The courtroom was silent when she finished. The judge's gavel came down, not as a final word but as a pause, a breath before history would decide what weight to give her truth. The trial stretched for days, arguments volleying back and forth, evidence dissected under fluorescent lights. Witnesses spoke, neighbors, colleagues, Pentagon officials who had been there that night. Archer himself took the stand, his testimony cutting through the defense like a blade. "I watched two armed men aim at a woman who posed no threat," he said. "I watched them ignore her words, her profession, her humanity. If we excuse that, we excuse the erosion of justice itself." When closing arguments ended, the jury vanished into deliberation. Hours crawled into a day, the tension outside swelling as crowds waited for a verdict. Maya sat in a quiet room with Archer, the hum of fluorescent lights above them. She pressed her palms together, whispering almost to herself, "What if they don't believe me? What if all of this ends the way it always does?" Archer looked at her, his expression firm yet gentle. "Then we keep fighting. But Maya, look at what you've already done. You've turned your pain into a mirror this country can't ignore. No verdict can erase that." When the jury returned, the world seemed to hold its breath. The foreman stood, papers trembling slightly in his hands. "On the charge of unlawful use of force. Guilty. On the charge of misconduct. Guilty." A collective roar rose outside, flooding through the courthouse doors. Maya exhaled, the tension unraveling from her body in a rush of disbelief and relief. The officers' faces twisted in shock, their lawyer pale with defeat. It was not perfect justice, but it was a crack in the wall, a sign that the system, however slowly, could bend toward truth when forced to. Reporters swarmed her as she stepped outside, microphones thrust forward like weapons of another kind. "Dr. Carter, how do you feel about the verdict?" She paused, the golden light of evening spilling over the crowd, painting the scene in the same warmth that had once framed her fear. "This is not just about me," she said. "This is about every life that has been threatened, diminished, or lost because of the color of their skin. Today's verdict is a step, but the road is long. We must keep walking it together. Justice is not a moment. It is a movement." The crowd erupted, chants rising again, but this time they carried hope as well as anger. That night, Maya stood on her apartment balcony, looking out at the city. For the first time in weeks, the sky felt wide instead of suffocating. Archer joined her, handing her a glass of water. They stood in silence for a while, the noise of protest drifting faintly in the distance. "Finally," he said, "you changed something today." Maya shook her head softly. "Not me. Us. The people who refused to look away. The ones who spoke, marched, recorded, testified. I was just one voice. Together, we became something louder." She thought of her patients, of the young interns she mentored, of the next generation watching this story unfold. She wanted them to inherit a world where survival wasn't tied to skin, where justice wasn't conditional. And for the first time since that night on the street, she believed it was possible. Not guaranteed, but possible. She raised her glass slightly, as if in a private toast. "To tomorrow," she whispered. Archer nodded. "To tomorrow." The golden light lingered on her face, no longer a fragile shield against fear, but a beacon of resilience. She was still tired, still scarred, but unbroken. And though the road ahead stretched long and uncertain, she knew she would keep walking Itone's step, one story, one truth at a time. For herself, for those who came before, for those yet to come. And so, the woman once held at gunpoint by prejudice now stood bathed in light, her voice echoing into a country still struggling to see. Not as a victim, not as a symbol, but as a human being who refused to be erased. Thank you for listening. If you find it interesting, please like and subscribe to follow the next stories.